The impact of climate change is currently one of the most discussed and debated subjects. Whether people deny that it's happening or they ignore it and just want to hold it at arm's length, a lot of people protest and get very active and campaign to try and stop climate change. And of course, other people despair, are consumed with anxiety about the impact of what is happening to the world. And perhaps there's good reason for that. Data indicates that the temperature across the globe continues to rise, that human activity burning fossil fuels is primarily responsible for that rise, and that we are rapidly approaching now this high water mark, forgive the pun, of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which means that, or it's suggested that at that point there will become serious issues for the climate that will affect nature, biodiversity, and of course human beings, with the poor being most adversely affected as the temperature begins to rise and we see extreme weather events and so on and so forth. Well, we thought on Sunday about three things that the Bible teaches us as we wrestle with these questions. And the first thing is that we are created to care. If you care about climate change, it's because you are made in the image of God. Genesis 1 tells us that being made in the image of God means in part that we are created to rule and subdue the earth. Subduing kind of has, I think, fairly negative connotation when we use that word often, but actually in Genesis it's used positively. The idea there is to bring order to the world, a chaotic world, to bring flourishing, to cultivate this uncultivated land, to steward it, to care for it like it's not our own, that it's been given to us with trust. That is exactly the picture that is given to us in Genesis 1 of God giving the world to us and saying, take care of it for me. You are my image bearers. You are to rule it in my place. But the second thing the Bible tells us is that we screwed that up, basically. The consequence of Adam and Eve's sin in Genesis 3 is that the ground is cursed. There is a fracturing, not just of the relationship between people and God, but a fracturing of all relationships, including our relationship with the world around us. And so when we look out and see lots of these things going on, we can see the consequences of that curse, of that fracturing of the creation order, of that disharmony. And so Paul says in Romans 8 that the creation groans as in the pains of childbirth. The world is not as it is meant to be. And that can feel like a big burden, can't it? What can Trinity Church do about that? What can we as individuals do about that? It's such a complex and complicated problem, and time appears to be short. And more than that, if we are the ones who have caused this problem, how can we be the ones who fix it? We still have a sin problem, and that's the underlying root that is driving all of this. Which is why the Bible says to us, thirdly, that Jesus is the answer. In Colossians 1, Paul again is writing and tells us that at the cross, Jesus dealt with sin so that all things are reconciled to God. Not just human beings, but all things, including all creation. Every aspect of creation is affected by what Jesus does at Calvary. What that means is that the curse of sin is not just lifted for those, for individuals who trust in Jesus, but it also has a massive consequence for the creation, because that harmony between God and mankind is starting to be restored, and that impacts then the world around us. Not immediately, the world is still broken by sin, but Paul also says in Colossians 1 that in the resurrection, Jesus is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. In other words, what happens to Jesus through his death and resurrection is the pattern to life for all who follow him. People, and also the creation. The world is dying. We all know that. It's beautiful and it's glorious, but it is failing just in the same way as our bodies are dying and failing. That is part of the curse of sin, but it's not the end of the story. The story doesn't end with the ice caps melting and us all being washed away in destruction. The story ends with Jesus coming again and renewing the creation. So the book of Revelation describes the picture of the renewed creation, the world fixed, and the people of God living in harmony with God and the world around it. That's our future. That's our hope. That's the hope for the world, the hope for the planet, the hope for biodiversity. So what do we do now then? Well, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We are to live as people of hope. We're not just to throw our hands up in the air and say, it doesn't matter, the world's dying, let's just leave it, abandon it. We don't do that with people. We don't say, from the moment a baby is born, technically that human life is on its journey to death. And so if anything bad happens to it, who cares? It doesn't matter. No, we should approach the planet in the same way as we approach caring for human life. And so we spoke on Sunday that there are different ways to think about that. First, we can talk about what it looks like to care for our community. How are you showing care for the creation in a local way, in this city? Whether that's picking up litter or being part of community groups that care for the local environment. Then you might be thinking on a more national or global scale, how can you join the campaign to show that we care about this creation and want to see big things changed? But how do we do that in a hopeful way? I think so much of the narrative around climate protest is very negative. There's a lack of hope in so many corners of that conversation. How do we engage with this saying, I'm here to care, but I'm also not taking the whole burden and responsibility upon myself. I'm trusting Jesus ultimately to bring the healing, the full healing that the world needs. And then finally, I wanted to encourage us to speak about Jesus. Ultimately, people are asking these questions. They are concerned, anxious about what is going to happen to the future of the planet. We need to present to them the fact that Jesus is the one who fixes these things. And the most caring, the most loving thing we can do for the world is share the one who so loved the world that he sent his only son to die to redeem the world. So have a good evening. I hope it's a good conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again on Sunday.